The driveway was packed with cars when I pulled in that night, headlights sweeping across the windows, glowing warm with golden light. Inside, I could hear the faint hum of voices rising over music, the kind of sound that usually meant my family was gathered around the dining table, passing plates, sharing stories. Thanksgiving was supposed to be about that, about coming together, about reminding each other that we belonged. But the picture waiting for me wasn't warm. It was cruel. Two small figures sat hunched on the stone steps, their shoulders trembling beneath their coats. My daughter clutched an empty plate on her lap, her hands stiff with cold. My son's head was bowed, his lips pressed together as if he was trying not to cry. The porch light cast shadows across their faces, making them look smaller than they were, as if the house itself had rejected them. I killed the engine and stepped out, the night air sharp against my skin. My son lifted his eyes to me, and that look, I'll never forget it. The way he tried to be strong, the way he whispered words he shouldn't have had to say. They told us we don't belong here, Mom. My breath caught, a knot tightening in my chest. I wanted to storm inside, to shout over the laughter echoing through the walls, but the sound of my children shivering in front of me silenced every impulse. I crouched down, brushing hair from my daughter's face, pressing their frozen fingers into my palms. I didn't let my voice tremble when I said, "Let's go home." I gathered them up, plates and all, and led them back to the car. Their eyes flicked toward the windows where silhouettes moved against the light. Not one door opened. Not one face appeared. They stayed inside celebrating, while my children were left outside like they were nothing more than a burden. The drive back was quiet. My son leaned his head against the window, his sister clutching his arm as though afraid they'd be separated again. I kept my focus on the road because if I looked at them too long, the anger burning in my stomach would have spilled over. I promised myself one thing as the lines of the street stretched ahead. They would never feel that small again. That night, after tucking them into bed, I sat alone at the dining table, staring at the untouched dishes I'd prepared that morning. The turkey, the rolls, the pies, all meant to be shared, now sitting cold and unwanted. My hands shook as I picked up the phone, opening folders I had kept locked away for years. Documents I had been too patient to use. Proof that the house they laughed in, the land they claimed, the inheritance they thought untouchable, it wasn't theirs. It never was. Morning came quickly. The sun rose over a frost-bitten lawn, pale light spilling across the edges of the house that had shut my children out. This time, I didn't come alone. With me were files, a manila folder thick with signatures and seals, and faces who knew the truth better than anyone. I knocked on the door, and when it opened, silence rippled across the room. My family froze, forks midway to their mouths, eyes darting to the papers in my hand. "I need you outside," I said. My voice carried the kind of finality that didn't invite questions. One by one, they shuffled out, confusion turning to unease as neighbors and relatives, already gathering after whispers of last night, watched from the edges of the yard. I pointed to the steps where my children had Saturday stand there. At first, no one moved. My uncle muttered something about a misunderstanding. My mother tried to soften her tone, asking me to lower my voice. But I wasn't asking. I waited until they all stood on the cold stone, the same place they had left my children. Their arms crossed, their pride brittle, but they were there, on display. Then I opened the folder. I read aloud the deeds, the wills, the notarized proof that everything they thought was theirs, the house, the land, the inheritance, had legally passed to me years ago. Their laughter from the night before collapsed into stunned silence, and then into fear. Gasps cut through the crowd as neighbors leaned in, realizing that the perfect family they had admired had kept the truth buried under arrogance and cruelty. "You told my children they didn't belong here," I said, my voice steady, though my hands trembled from holding back everything I wanted to scream. "But this house, this land, this family's name, it belongs to them." The words landed like blows. My aunt's face went pale, my cousin shifted uncomfortably, and my parents, their eyes welled as though tears could undo what they had done. I didn't step closer. I didn't need to. The weight of the truth pressed them down where they stood, surrounded by the very people they had hoped to impress. Whispers spread, neighbors shaking their heads, relatives muttering in disbelief. My family's smugness, their superiority, the cruel dismissal of my children, it all crumbled in the open daylight. For the first time, it was them standing in the cold, plates empty, pride shattered. The silence that followed my revelation wasn't relief. It was pressure, thick, unyielding, settling on everyone standing outside. My relatives shifted, their shoes scraping against the stone steps. My parents, who had once carried themselves as though their word was law, now looked smaller than I had ever seen them. Faces once smug were stripped bare, and every pair of eyes watching from the yard refused to look away. But humiliation doesn't last without consequence. And I hadn't gathered everyone just to make them uncomfortable. This wasn't about embarrassment, it was about accountability. I stepped forward, the folder still in my hand. Last night, while you filled your plates, my children sat here with nothing. They knocked. You heard them, and you still turned them away. My words were blunt, and I made no effort to soften them. The crowd leaned in closer, eager, unsettled, waiting for what would come next. My cousin, the first to break, tried to laugh, his voice unsteady. This is a misunderstanding. No one meant any harm. Stop. I cut in, raising a hand. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a pattern. Every holiday, every gathering, every moment when they should have been welcomed, you made sure they were outsiders. Last night just exposed what you really think. Murmurs rippled through the neighbors standing across the lawn. They had seen the family my parents presented to the world, the image of generosity and unity. Now they were watching that mass collapse. My uncle shifted uncomfortably, avoiding their stares. My aunt clasped her hands together, whispering something under her breath. I motioned toward the documents again. This house is no longer yours to command. The land beneath your feet, the walls you decorated, the space you claimed, it belongs to my children. Every legal right has been signed over. And from this day on, you stand here because they allow it, not because you deserve it. The words struck harder than any raised voice could. My mother's lips parted, trembling as if to argue, but no sound came out. My father's face tightened, but he didn't step forward. They knew the truth was sealed, witnessed, and undeniable. Behind me, my children stood in the doorway, their faces half hidden but watching. My son clutched his sister's hand, and I knew they were absorbing every second of this. They had been the ones left in the cold. Now, it was the others standing outside, stripped of the comfort they'd taken for granted. I turned my gaze back to the gathering. You told them they didn't belong. Today, you will ask them for forgiveness. Not me. Gasps spread through the crowd. Heads swiveled toward my children, their small figures visible in the doorway. My daughter shifted nervously, but my son lifted his chin, no longer shrinking into himself. He was ready to hear it. At first, no one spoke. Pride held them hostage. The same arrogance that had pushed my kids aside now kept their lips sealed. But the silence only fed the whispers in the yard. Neighbors whispered about cruelty, about hypocrisy, about the family that had claimed unity, but shown nothing but division. The weight of public judgment pressed down harder than my words ever could. Finally, my aunt stepped forward, her voice tight. I'm sorry. She looked at my children, not at me. You didn't deserve what happened. My son didn't answer. He simply stared, waiting for more. One by one, the others followed. My cousin mumbled his apology. My uncle cleared his throat before forcing the words out. My parents last of all, hesitant, reluctant, but cornered by the truth and the eyes of everyone around them. Each apology fell short, but each one chipped away at their pride. I didn't let them step back inside. Not yet. I raised my voice again, this time not just for them, but for everyone listening. This isn't only about last night. This is about years of dismissal, of turning your backs when support was needed. It's about treating us as though we were less. That ends now. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some nodded, some looked away, but all of them knew what I said was true. This wasn't a single event. It was the unmasking of a family that had hidden its cruelty behind closed doors. I closed the folder with a snap. From today forward, this house will no longer be your shield. You will not dictate who belongs. You will not decide who matters. That decision rests with the rightful heirs. My children stepped fully into the doorway then, their small figures framed by the light spilling from inside. The shift was clear. Last night, they had been excluded. This morning, they were the center. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, my father's voice broke through, low and defeated. What do you want from us? I looked him straight in the eye. I want you to feel what they felt. To stand outside while others watch. To taste the cold that bit at their skin. To understand that belonging isn't a right you grant, it's a truth you denied. And I will not let you forget it. The neighbors lingered, unwilling to leave. Some whispered about justice, others about shame. My relatives shifted, their discomfort plain, but they didn't move. The crowd had become their judge, and no defense could erase what everyone had seen. I let the silence settle once more before I spoke again. This isn't finished. You thought last night was just another celebration without us. But what you've done has set something in motion. Every step you take from here will be a reminder that what you built on pride has crumbled. And every time you look at this house, you will remember who truly belongs. I turned, motioning for my children to step back inside. The door closed behind us, leaving them on the porch where my kids had sat hours before. The roles were reversed, and no amount of pleading could undo it. Inside, the air was still heavy but different. My children moved cautiously at first, their eyes darting toward the windows as though expecting someone to burst back in. But when no one did, they exhaled, their shoulders loosening. For the first time, they stood in this house not as outsiders, but as owners. I sat with them at the table, pulling the cold dishes from the night before into the center. The food was no longer fresh, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that they could eat here, inside, where they belonged. As they took their first bites, I watched their faces soften, relief finally settling in. Outside, I could still hear the faint shuffle of relatives shifting in the cold, their voices low, their pride stripped away. The neighbors hadn't dispersed. The story was spreading, carried from one mouth to another, and I knew it wouldn't fade quickly. What they had hidden for years had now been exposed, and there was no way to contain it again. As my children ate, I kept my voice steady. This is just the beginning. What happened last night will not be forgotten. And tomorrow, the world will know the truth as clearly as you do now. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. The shift had already taken root, and they understood what it meant. Their voices, long ignored, were finally being heard. By the third morning, the neighborhood had changed. Conversations that once skipped lightly over fences now turned sharp, carrying my family's name with them. Everyone had seen it. Children locked out, parents exposed, relatives forced to apologize under a rising sun. The house that once held authority now stood as a monument to their shame. I didn't need to chase rumors. They spread on their own, faster than I could have planned. And that was the point. For years, they had built an image of respectability. It had crumbled in 2 days, and I wasn't finished. The truth had to be cemented, sealed so firmly that they could never claw their way back into control. That morning, I called them together one final time.
No neighbors this time, not yet.
Only family. I wanted their masks gone before the world witnessed the last blow. They filed into the living room reluctantly, the same room they had filled with laughter 2 nights before while my children sat outside. Now their expressions were heavy, drawn, and strained. I set the folder on the table again, thicker than before. This wasn't just deeds and wills anymore. These were records, financial statements, proof of debts they had ignored, mismanagement they had hidden, the quiet neglect they thought no one would uncover. Every page was legal, every detail precise. You thought I only came with the house, I began. My voice was even, but my words carried weight. But this goes deeper. For years you've used the land, the assets, the inheritance as if it belonged to you. It doesn't. And the records prove not only your misuse, but your lies. They stiffened. My cousin leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the documents. My uncle shifted in his seat, already restless. My parents sat frozen, caught between fury and fear. This, I continued, tapping the folder, is the end of your claim. The end of your authority. From this day forward, every account, every title, every right passes directly to me and to my children. My father's voice broke the silence, brittle and sharp. You can't do this. You don't understand what you're tearing apart. I met his gaze without hesitation. What you tore apart was family. What you destroyed was trust. I'm not tearing anything. I'm reclaiming what was always ours. My mother tried to intervene, her tone soft, pleading. We were wrong, we know that. But this will ruin us. No, I said firmly. You ruined yourselves when you left children in the cold. When you thought belonging was something you could deny. Today is simply the moment the world sees you for who you are. I opened the folder, sliding the documents across the table one by one. Deeds signed and notarized, accounts with my name, legal transfers already filed. Every page stripped them further of the illusion of control. Their hands twitched, reaching but never touching, as if they already knew resistance was useless. My children stood quietly at my side, watching. I wanted them to see every second of this, the unveiling, the shift, the reversal. They deserved the satisfaction of knowing they were no longer outsiders. I straightened. This house is no longer your home. You'll gather your belongings today. By nightfall, you'll be gone. Gasps erupted. My cousin leapt from his chair. You can't just throw us out. Yes, I answered calmly. I can, and I will, because the law is on my side, not yours. Every claim you thought you had dissolved years ago. I stayed silent. I gave you time, and you used it to shut my children out. That silence ends today. My uncle's voice rose, desperate. We have nowhere else to go. That isn't my concern, I replied. You showed none for us. You'll learn what it feels like when comfort is taken away. The weight of my words settled like stone. They knew there was no appeal, no loophole, no argument strong enough to break through. Their time was finished. By afternoon, word spread. Neighbors gathered again, not by invitation, but by curiosity. Relatives who hadn't been there earlier came when they heard whispers of eviction. And I allowed it. I opened the doors wide, so everyone could see. My family carried their belongings out, bags and boxes clutched in stiff hands, their faces drained of dignity. The same steps where my children had been left now held their humiliation. Each trip across the yard was another reminder. Their reign over this place was gone. Whispers ran through the crowd, some harsh, some pitying, but none defending them. No one excused what they had done. No one stepped forward to shield them. For the first time, they stood without protection. My children sat at the window, watching as the ones who had once looked down on them struggled under the eyes of the world. My son's lips curved into the faintest smile, my daughter leaning against his shoulder, her fear finally gone. By nightfall, the house was silent again. Their cars were gone. Their voices were absent. The rooms, once filled with judgment and exclusion, now belonged only to us. I gathered my children in the living room, the glow of the lamp casting warm light across their faces. It's finished, I told them. They can't take this from you. Not anymore. They didn't answer right away. They just looked around, taking in the house, their house, without the weight of rejection hanging over it. My daughter whispered finally, "We belong here." I nodded. "You always did." The words weren't for comfort. They were the truth. The proof had been signed, sealed, and carried out in full view.
No one could question it now.
The final act wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge for the sake of satisfaction. It was permanence. They had been forced to stand in the cold. They had been stripped of their false pride. And now, they were gone, completely, undeniably gone. As the night settled, I stood at the doorway where my children had once sat with empty plates. I looked out at the quiet yard, the place where everything had turned. It wasn't the cold that lingered anymore. It was peace.